Welcome, Tom.
Hiya, Jace. Nice to see you.
And you, mate. Episode 9, 10x6. And a bit of a request to the viewers. If you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and maybe leave some comments underneath the videos, because that always pushes it up further up the pecking order as well, so to speak.
Yeah, we'd love to know what people think of the discussions, the debates, the topics. I'm sure everyone watching has, strong views on some of the things we discuss, and we'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, well, we're getting a lot from other parts of social media, obviously, when these programs are shared. It's just that we're getting very few people who are actually commenting on YouTube itself. And I don't know whether that's common or whether people prefer to share their perspectives elsewhere. But, if we can get some underneath the video, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Right, straight on with the show. And the first one is something that's probably a couple of weeks old, in relation to the Dominic Cummings WhatsApp, in which he identified the incompetence of our dear Health Secretary, Matthew Hancock, and how the Prime Minister himself perceives Matthew Hancock, and it's not very positively. But obviously what we've seen since then is the attempt to cover it up. I mean, Matthew Hancock came on TV the other day and said, he thought that those comments were made under stress. He was under duress, and a lot of things were going on and all that sort of stuff. So you've got that, and you've got Boris Johnson coming out and saying, don't listen to Dominic Cummings, don't take anything that he says seriously, so to speak, and it's all a load of rubbish. What a shame that Boris Johnson and particularly didn't have that perception in mind when he employed Dominic Cummings for well over a year, on the back of his successful campaign.
Did you say deceitful?
Yes, I did say yes. Sorry, yes, yeah. I must check my spelling. In relation to his successful deceitful campaign to orchestrate. And I'm saying this not somebody who's a Remainer or a Leaver. I'm just saying this as somebody who recognises reality when he sees it, when it's brimming with evidence, in terms of the referendum campaign. So Dominic Cummings was the golden boy until he wasn't, and then when he wasn't, he's more Attila the Hun, and Attila the Hun probably laying into this government for millions of people would probably be a welcome sight. But we're not going to focus too much. I mean, I know you want to have a quick word about the WhatsApp messages, Tom, but we focus less upon Dominic Cummings and Matthew Hancock and Boris Johnson's spat, and more on a phrase that you sort of coined: who do we allow to die, based on the whiteboard. So if you can just explain that a little bit further.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a phrase I coined. It was written on the Downing Street whiteboard. So the thing I wanted to particularly pick up on, and it's been sort of in my mind constantly over the last couple of weeks, is this image that amongst the WhatsApp messages that Cummings has released, proving that what he said, some of which proves what he said was true, that there was this image of a whiteboard with wording on, obviously discussions that they were having at Downing Street. Now, people have focused very much, and to some extent rightly so, people have focused on him revealing and releasing the WhatsApp messages between him and Boris Johnson, revealing Johnson describing back last March at the very start of the pandemic, revealing that his health secretary that will be in charge of the response to the pandemic was effing hopeless. Those were Johnson's words, and he's backed that up by releasing the actual WhatsApp messages. And people are focused on that, and understandably so. If right at the start of the pandemic, Johnson was saying that Hancock was hopeless, effing hopeless, and was considering replacing him with Gove, and then didn't. And since then, Hancock has been found in court to have lied about things and to have acted unlawfully, and Johnson has still stood by him, then obviously people are very right to question why that is, especially as we're 150,000 deaths down the line through their incompetence and negligence. But it keeps coming into my mind that actually the focus should really be far more on what was in the bottom right hand corner of that whiteboard. And it was, the question was written on the whiteboard, who do we not save? And yes, at the time that it was released, there was some outrage about that, to a small extent, from opponents of the government, but it's not something that's been particularly discussed, widely discussed, regularly discussed. And I keep finding that staggering, because who do we not save as a question that the government are posing is really staggering when you think about it. Another way of saying who do we not save is who do we allow to die? Quite simply, who do we allow to die? Now, can you imagine, viewers, can you imagine if that were a Labour government? Imagine a Corbyn-led Labour government, and they're found on a whiteboard in Downing Street during a pandemic to have written, who do we not save, or who do we allow to die? There would be widespread, massive national media and public calls for the whole government to resign, especially once 150,000 odd people had died, especially when we're finding that a large proportion of people hospitalized in care homes, people who are perfectly well but have a learning disability, had do not resuscitate orders placed on their medical records, often without discussion with them or their families. An absolute disgrace, something that hopefully will be thoroughly investigated, and how those DNR orders came to pass, came to be decreed, will be uncovered, and I hope people go to prison over that. It's a really shocking aspect of the pandemic that hasn't been fully uncovered yet.
But can I just say at this point, big but, so many things have been revealed over the last 18 months going on, and nothing has been done. We've had minister after minister standing in front of cameras, butting and umming and lying, misrepresenting, whatever, but nothing's been done. And then we talk about an inquiry. Well, we've had so many inquiries in the past about a whole range of things, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Grenfell. I mean, we can go back through time and just look at so many different inquiries. The first report, which we keep talking about in terms of institutional racism in the Met, but nothing really ever changes. It's just a lip service. So the chances of us ever having a government minister, let alone a prime minister, but a government minister being found guilty in the courts and sent to prison are they're zilch.
Or even being held to account in any meaningful
or even
way.
being held to properly account. So are we really wasting our time, Tom, in pointing all these things out sometimes when we know full well that the establishment will pull together, power will pull together, the corrupt will pull together and ensure that if there is a patsy, they'll throw them to the wind. But ultimately, most of them will carry on their super yachts, living a luxurious lifestyle, and generally urinating above on the rest of us.
Absolutely, and part of that is because currently the Conservatives have an 80-seat majority and control over not just government but all sorts of aspects that should act as a sort of check and balance on authoritarian power, but aren't, because they've attacked and undermined those checks and balances. in an authoritarian way, but also primarily because you know, the vast majority of media, especially print media, is owned by billionaires that support the Conservatives in what they're doing because they don't like paying much tax, apart from other reasons.
But even outside of that,
yeah,
if you look at Blair and his centrists in 2003, 2004, they lied to the nation, and they lied probably on behalf of George Bush and the CIA and the Pentagon, etc. They lied to the nation, and the carnage that they created as a result in Iraq and Afghanistan far outweighs anything that Saddam Hussein, as bad as he was, and Colonel Gaddafi did. And yet both of those were eliminated, shall we say. They didn't even end up in court. They didn't end up on trial. They didn't go to The Hague. They were eliminated because they were people that we certainly couldn't put in the dock because of what they would reveal and the debate that would create globally. So they have their ways and means of eliminating these people. Yet many, many people have been calling for the likes of Blair and Bush to end up in The Hague for the last 15 odd years. And yet the chances of it happening again are zilch.
Yeah, you're right. But I'm going back to your initial point. You know, is it pointless us you know, raising these issues and hoping for inquiries or things to actually get truth and justice and accountability for politicians' actions? You're right that no doubt you know, inquest, investigation, whatever, into the government's pandemic response, coordinated by the government, will more or less completely exonerate them of you know, causing deaths through their actions or being negligent or anything. And certainly individual politicians, especially high up, will not be found accountable for anything. But all of that doesn't mean that we shouldn't highlight these things. And of course, we know that we're battling against a very right-wing media that's you know, that supports this government's actions. And all we can do through doing things like, you know, through having publications, you know, independent citizen media like Dorset Eye, is to allow different viewpoints to be shared. And the point of having 10 by 6 is hopefully some of the viewers will start to think, well, yeah, that message on our government's, in 10 Downing Street, on our government's whiteboard, was a thing that said, who do we not save? Which means, who do we allow to die? Our government were discussing that at the start of the pandemic. Who do we allow to die? And then some of their actions come into a bit more sort of focus when you know that that's the basis of their discussions.
I think absolutely. I agree with you totally, Tom. I think we have a absolute duty to reveal reality. But that wasn't my point. I think my point was more about the hope that we have that the people who are responsible will face justice. I think that it's that last bit where we actually want to see people who have lied, who are corrupt, who've been incompetent in positions of power, have abused that power, to be held responsible. And like you said, they very, very, very rarely are now.
No.
They pretty much, and in fact they do, as we saw with Blair, and as we've seen with Matthew Hancock, as we've seen with Boris Johnson, they get away with at least manslaughter. And for many people, as you rightly pointed out, who do we allow to die? It's a premeditated, which means it's more in the scope of murder.
Absolutely.
But it's not just yeah. Sorry, no, I was just going to say and it doesn't just start here, does it? I mean, if we go to this quote from Bill Bryson, where he sums it up perfectly, that all the rubbish that we've been fed by the Conservative government since 2010, if we just go to 2000 and the turn of into 2020 with the constant repetitive propaganda, we were told that the NHS in this country is ready for the COVID pandemic. And yet, when we look at the effect of 10 years of austerity leading up to the pandemic, we know empirically, that they again are lying to us. He says, on the other hand, it is possible to spend too little, and Britain certainly seems determined to lead that category among high-income nations. Britain comes 35th out of 37 wealthy countries for number of CT scanners per person. Well, we've seen how important scanners have been. 31st out of 36 for MRI scanners, and 35th out of 41 for number of hospital beds per size of population. Well, in a time of a pandemic, what do you need more than hospital beds? Very little. The British Medical Journal reported in early 2019 that cuts to health and social care budgets between 2010 and 2017, the year when Jeremy Corbyn almost became elected Prime Minister, led to about 120,000 early deaths in the UK, a pretty shocking finding. So if you add the 120,000 early deaths, plus the 150,000 people that have died as a result of COVID, and we do have the highest death rate on the planet per population, what we find is that well over 250,000 people have died in this country unnecessarily as a direct result of Tory government mismanagement and austerity measures based on an ideology that's been long since proven not to be effective or efficient.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's extremely scary that, and you made the point earlier about the people who are most vulnerable in relation to who should we allow to die, are also the people who don't engage with social media, who spend very little time researching other than watching the 6 o'clock news bulletin, who know very little. And in going back to what you were saying earlier about having the information in a democracy and being aware, and yet they were the ones who were put out to pasture by the Conservative government from the very outset as being the ones that we didn't have to prioritise in terms of saving. So I wonder if they had that information, if they all had that information and they're all clued up and skilled up and tooled up in terms of understanding what it means to be in a democracy and to be the recipient of abuses of power, whether they would still whether they're so likely to put their X next to a Conservative candidate in a ballot box.
Well, I hope so, Jason. I hope that, you know, all people, not just people in those sort of categories, if you like, sort of vulnerable categories, but I hope all people will recognise what this government have been doing. Will recognise that, you know, they've been making choices that have led to, as you say, due to austerity measures and due to their appalling pandemic response, led to over 250,000 early deaths. And there's an answer to their question. You know, who do we not save? Who do we allow to die? Which, just to reiterate, I'm absolutely convinced that if it were a Labour government and that image of the whiteboard with that question on it, who do we not save? If that had been a Labour government, every single newspaper, and in particular, you know, all the right-wing newspapers, the billionaire-owned corporate media, the Sun, the Mail, the Express, the Times, the Telegraph, they would all have that image and that question on the whiteboard on their front page, and they would be calling for resignation. They would say, resign now, you must go, without a doubt. And yet, because it's a Conservative government, they've hardly covered it. It's staggering. Our government were discussing who do they choose not to save the lives of? And we have an answer to that question. The answer is the poorest people, the elderly, the vulnerable, those with comorbidities, those who are already have one or more illnesses, and the economically unproductive. In other words, the more costly to society. They've said, yeah, those people, the pensioners, the old folk, the ill, the infirm, those with learning disabilities, they're the ones that we're choosing not to save. That was their answer.
I think that's a good place to stop. And I think our primary hope maybe is that there should be a lot more wokes who wake up and start to understand and start to realize what's being done, not just in their name, but being done to them and their families. And they should respond appropriately. And I think by responding appropriately, it means that they don't put an X next to a political party that's effectively going to murder them. Right, moving on to the next issue, the next topic, Tom. It was a conversation, an interview I had with Andy Miller, who is an author. He now lives up north, but he spends his childhood growing up in and around Weymouth and the Jurassic Coast. And he's published a new book called Never a Word. And I spoke to him earlier in the week about his book and about himself in terms of being an author and his hopes for how many people and what readership he can get there with the text. So a fascinating interview, a lovely man. Here's Andy Miller. Hi, Andy Miller. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Hello, Jason. Hi.
Great to have you on the show. We're talking to Andy today, who is a retired psychologist, award-winning poet, written a number of novels. So you've got quite a varied background. Also, you're into rock climbing, cycling. So there's many strands to Andy's bow. But we're talking to him specifically today about his new novel, Never a Word, set in both Weymouth from a historical perspective and Portsmouth. And Andy's going to be telling us about his new book. So can you introduce just the book to the viewers, please, Andy, in first instance?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Jason. I don't need to wave it about because you've got it mounted nicely behind you there. But a quick way in might be for me to just read the back cover blurb, because I think that gives an outline of what the thing's about, and then we can talk about various bits of that. Okay, so this is the content of the back cover. In 1927, on a beautiful stretch of the Dorset coast, a mother of 3 walks into the sea and drowns. 55 years later, Sue Roberts hears about the manner of her grandmother's death for the first time. As she delicately prizes further information from her unstable mother, Sue learns that her kind-hearted father has forbidden all discussion of the tragedy. He has never even allowed his mother's name to be known. But never is a word Sue cannot accept. How and why have her parents kept this shocking secret from her? What has blunted her curiosity so effectively and for so long? Will Sue's life and family break apart as she seeks the truth?
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
And the nature of this book is it's more fiction based, because obviously we serialized your previous book from 2015, The Naples of England, and
yeah, you did.
It was much more of a memoir, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
It talked about briefly, well, not talked about briefly, it talked about you growing up. Can you just very, very briefly just summarize The Naples of England for us, and then we'll obviously make
I can. Yeah. Here we go. Thank you again for serializing. I appreciated that very much. The Naples of England was a memoir, just very lightly fictionalized in places. Names and places were changed, and perhaps 1 or 2 flourishes put in just for a little bit of extra effect. It did describe growing up. I was born in Weymouth just after the Second World War, and I wrote a series of vignettes that went through from about 1950 to the mid-1960s, and I thought I was covering just topics that I found interesting. Some of them were supposed to be funny, humorous, and some of them were quite poignant, and some of them were very much of the time. I didn't think I had a conscious plan about writing it, but when I look back on it, I think I was trying to describe a period which to a child seemed like a secure period. The 1950s are always talked about as being dull and boring, but they may also have felt safe, I think, for people like me. I was also describing a place that felt safe. I think Weymouth and Portland, that the visual arrangement on the map fascinated me as a kid. I thought, who could live in a more interesting place than this? West Bay curving in one side, Weymouth Bay curving in the other side. Well, I didn't know much about symbolism as a kid, but I could feel the kind of warmth and security of Weymouth Bay as a place where, I played on the sands as a kid a lot. And then I could feel the wild, raging terror of West Bay and thought, well, these are two sides to the human psyche, really. I didn't think in those terms, but the contrast was so dramatic, really. And then that ring of hills at Ridgeway, which kind of was a northern boundary, really. I don't think I went anywhere much as a kid. I think when I reflected on it, I thought before I took up hitchhiking at about 17, I think I'd probably been outside that triangle north of the Ridgeway about a dozen times in my first 16 years. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a car. So, but we also didn't have a great incentive to go anywhere else. It just felt complete, really. I mean, by the time I was 17, I couldn't wait to get in the big city. So I think I was describing various vignettes of good times, but also, terrible times, fear, but a secure, a contained world, really, both physically on that map and also, if you like, psychologically and socially. It felt like a stable community. And then, as you know, in the last two chapters, I zoomed forward to a revelation that just came from my mum quite by chance, really, and washing up on a Boxing Day in the 1980s, when I learned that my dad's mother had killed herself, had walked into the sea somewhere in Dorset. And I finished the book there, trying to contrast this sort of sense of a secure, predictable world through the 1950s and 60s with this shock that actually had been anything but, really. But as a kid, I had no sense of it at all. So I just thought I'd leave that hanging, really. And interesting, a lot of people since have read it and said, well, I found out something about my family, or we had a suicide, or I never knew until I was in my 30s. So what I thought was a kind of shocking and rare event for me has proved to be much less so, really, as more people have talked to me. And so that was that book. And the point of the novel was to say, well, what if you start from that place at the end? And what if you use that situation about somebody finding out in their 30s about a suicide and then wondering, as I said in the blurb here, wondering how they could have been so blind to it and how that knowledge was just swept away and stayed swept away. So I used that as a starting point then for a novel, and that's never a word.
And it could easily be, for people finding out such a revelation, it could easily be a sort of Pandora's jar, couldn't it? It could expose them to a whole number of things that perhaps, looking back retrospectively in the future, they would say, I didn't really want to know that.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, once it's out the box, you can't get it back in again.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that
sorry.
No, you go forward, please.
I gave my character, Sue. Sue, like me, was born at the end of the Second World War, and she's had, there's some of me in Sue, but there's also some creation and some other people I've known, women I've known. But I've given her the task of dealing with all those issues coming out of Pandora's box.
Yes, and she's obviously the central character here, isn't she? She welds it all together. She's on the one hand, she's got the parents, and obviously the revelation that comes many years later that her grandmother had to see, and the fact, as you said earlier, that the father wanted to keep it quiet. He didn't want to talk about it. She's also got her relationship with her sister.
Yeah.
And also she's got the historical, hasn't she? Because she starts to explore her grandmother's life up until that fateful day.
That's right.
You've got the history, I guess, sort of based more in Weymouth, then you've got the transition to Portsmouth, and you've got the two things ever colliding.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Sue is the major character in the book, but an equally major character is her grandmother, Letitia. And the book, if you like, has two life stories going on which develop. One is Letitia. We don't know that she's the grandmother at first, but it's written so that it's fairly obvious that it is her. So we have Letitia's story going through to her fateful day, and then we have Sue's story going back as she investigates. And in between these two main characters, there are Sue's parents, her father being Letitia's son. And what I quite like to do as a challenge, really, in terms of the structuring of the book, was to tell the story about Sue's parents' relationship, but indirectly, rather than them being the main characters. We see quite a lot about their life through Letitia's story and through Sue's story.
Right. And
so we're dealing with three generations, really, but the middle generation's in the sandwich.
Yes, and that's obviously where Sue realizes that her mum and dad aren't quite what she thought they were.
Exactly, yes. She has a major moral dilemma, Sue, which is she comes to realize how hurt her father must have been as a child, losing his mother in that tragic way, and how, he had every right to try to cope, and the family had every right to cope as best they could, and banning mention was their way of coping. But then Sue has the dilemma of saying, well, she just cannot live with this woman being obliterated from history. She feels she must reintroduce her into history. And she realizes at one stage, when a photograph finally emerges of her grandmother, that she looks like the grandmother. She remembers that, she compares Sue's own primary school photograph with the photograph of her young grandmother, and realizes that they look similar. They share bone and tissue and blood, and she cannot let this woman just be disappeared from history. So she has to find out more about her. But she knows that the finding out is potentially incredibly hurtful to her father, who she doesn't want to hurt, whose hurt she recognizes. So the book is about the moral dilemma that Sue has in struggling with these two competing forces.
I read a review online in which one of the people who read the book, they said that it's not only about reading a novel of fiction, it's about using the opportunity to reflect on your own life experience as well, in terms of, what secrets if your parents or if your grandparents or siblings or etc., what secrets have they hidden that are significantly dramatic? And it is interesting, isn't it? Because it does make you to start to question the nature of reality of people around you. When, like you said at the very beginning, on Boxing Day, your mum revealed to you something that you hadn't known before, and then whack.
Yes.
Whack. And exactly. And then it leads you to write a book based on the fact that you'll never lose that moment. You'll never forget, will you, that Boxing Day, that moment when it happened.
No. I had the book, really. Yeah. I mean, I'm delighted. The book's only been out, was less than a couple of months, but there've been some early readers and a few reviews on Amazon, as you mentioned. I'm just delighted that people have said the book's made them think, because of a book somebody said to me once that particularly about novels, that what they value, what characterized a good novel for them was the fact that they were almost grieving when it was finished, that they'd lost something and they were missing it. And, there have been a few books I've read that have had that effect on me, that my life feels like something important's gone just because I've read the last page. Well, I wouldn't be so bumptious as to say that's what my book's doing. But if it's had that kind of a bit of that effect for some people, well, I'll be absolutely delighted. I feel I've shared something, really.
And especially coming intellectually from a point of view where you're a psychologist.
I'm only a psychologist in the day job, but I'm an ordinary human being at other times. But I've looked at it from both sides. Yeah.
And especially educational psychology, because you're dealing with young people and
family.
And in this instance, you're dealing with Sue, who is a young person.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, secrets in families is a massive topic, but for psychologists, and it's interesting, kind of people working in with family therapy approaches. One of the areas, if there's a family in trouble, either because the whole family feels they're in trouble, or often because the family feels one of the members is a problem, but actually you've probably got a systemic issue going on as well. one of the approaches that psychologists, therapists will take is to look for the secrets. What are the secrets in this family? We've probably all got them. And then what are the rules, the implicit rules about the secrets? Who's allowed to know the secret? Who's not allowed to know the secret? Who's allowed to tell somebody else about it? Who's not allowed to tell a certain person about it? All these implicit rules that never stated, but you get a feel of them in a family, and you certainly know about it if you transgress, either deliberately or accidentally. So secrets are a massive feature of all families, really, but not all of them are kind of tragic and big, but they're all there, really, around birth, sex, death, and probably money. They're all families have got them. Yeah. So I was interested in that aspect from a slightly more theoretical view. But
I mean, I found out at a relatively early age that my great-grandfather in 1918 had taken his own life,
right,
quite violently, because he couldn't cope anymore because his wife, my grandmother's mother, had died during childbirth in 1909.
right,
and
right.
those 9 years, I think he must have just hung on, because in the end he just, 1918, he slashed his throat and his wrist and took his own life. And my grandmother found him, which is obviously, she was only 13 at the time, but she was open about it. She told me about it because we had a close relationship. But yeah, absolutely, as soon as you find out something like that, it never goes. I think even if you start to get probably some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's, it's probably still one of those memories that will stay with you till the end.
And in fact, if you get something like dementia or some sort, it may actually lower the barriers which stop you expressing it. So you might actually find it coming out, maybe in strange ways, but you may find that it's finally a chance to release that stuff. One of the themes that's in the novel is the burden that Sue's mother has carried of knowing this information, but it being a tightly guarded secret that she's never supposed to talk about. So she has to carry that trauma for her husband, and of course that doesn't do good things for her either. So the book doesn't make judgments. Well, I hope it doesn't make judgments. It just talks about the terrible dilemmas that people get ensnared in, really, by virtue of a tragedy.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Andy, because I can't wait to come into contact with lots of people who read your book, especially locally in the Waving Portland area, etc., and to be able to engage with them in talking about how it affected them and how they perceived it, especially those people who've lived here for a long time and also their parents, grandparents, etc., maybe have come from the local area. But yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on the show, 10 by 6. We'll have you on again really, really soon. One thing I just want to ask you: how can readers, how can viewers of the program, how can they access your book?
Okay, well, it's there on Amazon. Never a Word, Andy Christopher Miller, as shown on the screen behind you. I know some people don't like Amazon, and I fully understand the reasons why. So they can also get a copy directly from me. If they email me at Andy Christopher Miller, all one word, all lowercase, at gmail.com. So Andy Christopher Miller, as behind you, but all one word and lowercase, at gmail.com. I can then send them details about bank transfer, and they can send me an address.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put that onto the video when it's published.
Okay.
So I'll put the contact. I'll put both the Amazon link and your email address, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And then people can choose whichever direction they would like to go.
Fabulous.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jason. I really appreciate it. It's been nice talking to you, and it's been lovely for me to be able to. I think we've exceeded the 10 minutes, don't you?
Don't worry about that. It's absolutely our pleasure. Thank you so much, Andy. Speak soon.
Nice to talk. Yeah. Bye-bye. See you. Bye-bye.
Right, moving on to topic number 3 this week. And it's probably a topic that we could have covered earlier. And it's Kier Starmer's Labour. And I often think, looking at it the way the Labour Party has changed so dramatically since Jeremy Corbyn stepped down, which is effectively now 14 months ago, that I think Keir Starmer is probably going to get a place in the Lords entirely based on his management of the Labour Party to make it unelectable. It almost feels to me now that he's been brought in to do absolutely everything possible to destroy the Labour Party. Now, it may well be that he's just because he's gone back to being like Tony Blair, the centrist, trying to appeal to both sides, trying to formulate policies that doesn't annoy both sides too much. But I think that his problem, obviously, is that when Jeremy Corbyn came in, he said, I'm not going to be appealing to right-wing voters. My appeal was going to be to those people who want a much fairer, more egalitarian, less corrupt society that focuses on the 99%, or certainly focuses upon the population as a whole, as opposed to a small elite clique. And it just means that when Keir Starmer then took over, he just appears to be appealing to the small elite clique again. So it may not be that he's that dramatically different to what's gone before. It's just that Jeremy Corbyn makes those types of people stand out so dramatically. But of course, the other side of the coin is, Tom, is that he played such a dramatic part in undermining Jeremy Corbyn. He was part of that right-wing, centrist blob of people who spent their time coming up with anything that they could to put voters off voting for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. So none of them have any right to be in the Labour Party because they didn't accept the democratic mandate of the members when it came to voting for the leader of the Labour Party, both in 2015 and again in 2016. Incidentally, the 2016 leadership led to Jeremy Corbyn having an even bigger majority. So none of them were prepared to accept the democratic mandate of the members of the Labour Party. So quite frankly, none of them, absolutely none of them, should be anywhere near the Labour Party or allowed to be members. Because it's not as though they stood up and they said, well, we don't agree with a lot what Jeremy Corbyn says, but hey, vote for the Labour Party. They almost did everything they possibly could to get a Boris Johnson government.
Yeah.
And the other side of it, if there is another side, is we've had 16 months and I can't think of one Labour Party policy. You know, at least when somebody comes in, they're coming in with this fresh start, if you like, even if it is centrist, fresh start saying this is what we want to do. I can't honestly name one policy, can you, that Labour Party currently represents?
Labour for business in some vague way.
Yeah, but it's sound bites.
Not necessarily workers,
it's not substance. It's sound bites, not substance, isn't it? It's more Blairite, Trumpian. Just say something that meaningless that hopefully people who don't take an interest in politics will succumb to. Mm-hmm. But from those people, obviously, who are interested in democracy and politics and making society better, it's a blank menu.
Yeah. As we discussed before, Jace, the both major parties in this country have lurched massively to the right in the last few years, particularly the last couple of years. Tories under Johnson and the extreme right-wing cabinet that are now running the country, the most right-wing government cabinet that we've probably ever had in my lifetime, at least, and the One Nation, the old Conservatives that were sort of regarded as moderate One Nation Conservatives have all gone. They've been kicked out. They've left, and it's really a very, very right-wing party now. And the Eurosceptics, the ERG, took it over, and are employing their own particularly unpleasant brand of nationalism. And same with the Labour Party. The Labour Party, has obviously lurched to the right. It's had its own internal struggle between the left and the right of the Labour Party, as the Tories did, if you like. And the Labour at the moment have won that argument. The centrists, the Blairites, the people like Peter Mandelson, and obviously Keir Starmer have won that, and Labour has moved massively.
But I don't agree that they've won. They've lost the last 3 by-elections.
Yeah,
probably,
I mean, they've won control.
They're almost certainly going to. Yeah, of course. Yeah, they're almost certainly going to lose the 4th. So in terms of the population just don't want to know Labour under Keir Starmer, because he doesn't stand for anything. And the problem also that they have is that in the Hartlepool by-election, whoever made this decision and whoever, gave it the go-ahead, you had a candidate who was an arch Remainer. You had the leader of the party who is an arch Remainer, standing in a seat where you're trying to win back red wall voters who primarily voted to leave. I mean, it's beyond incompetent. I mean, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer's together, I mean, it's doing a disservice to Laurel and Hardy. It really is. They are far beyond that. They're the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
They're absolutely clueless, and yet they're the 2 main establishment parties that at the end of the day, come the election, it will be one or the other who have the power. It is so frightening.
It is. I know you're going to read out something from our colleague Adam, our friend and colleague Adam Samuels, about what's really been happening within the Labour Party under Keir Starmer. So go ahead and do that, Jason, and then we'll talk a bit more about for those that are involved and know about that stuff, and for those that aren't, how that affects them.
Okay. If you bully, harass, and are racist to your own members to the point they leave in their droves, if you break your own rules, break the law, act internally in fascistic, completely anti-democratic ways, if you shut down debate, suspend those votes of no confidence, suspend members with no reason, no evidence, no time frame, no right of appeal or representation, if you have media mates who report none of this, if you suspend more Jewish members than any other leader with complete impunity, if you betray the Jewish, Muslim, Black, Asian, Kashmiri, Palestinian, BAME, traveller, trans and disabled members and populations, if you position yourself to the right of the Tories on economics, if neoliberal centre-right Joe Biden looks like Karl Marx in comparison to you, if you lie about every single pledge you're elected on, if you ignore your own legal advice, if you stand with landlords wanting interest from people who cannot afford the basic rent above those renters, if you backtrack on environmental pledges, if you seek the support and endorsement of the Murdoch press and Daily Sunday Mail, if you welcome back in some of the most corrupt, previously sacked people ever to be in the party, you ask for favours from convicted paedophiles, if you cancel selection process, remove whips illegally, break PLP rules, break EHRC proudly and publicly, if you completely sell out, ignore our own legal advice, if you protect and refuse to prosecute all crimes, murderers, rapists and torturers, while extraditing those exposing those crimes, if you are in the trilateral or tripartite commission, if you are a sir in addition to all this, if you lie compulsively, if you meet regularly socially with the Secret Service, if you ignore sovereign disciplinary decisions, if you promote racists and bullies, if you lie about anti-racists, if you listen to people in groups who are far right and Tory party donors, if you sell access to policy meetings and create tiered payment and membership options, you are absolutely not left-wing. And that sums it up. And that's probably only part of the problem, but let's face it, with those list of indictments against your name, you probably shouldn't be allowed out, let alone be a member of a leader of a political party.
And some of that I didn't even touch on, or really detail, the part that Starmer and Starmer allies had in undermining Corbyn, in promoting lies against Corbyn, and effectively working within the Labour Party at Labour Party headquarters in the last 2 elections to stop Labour from winning. Quite the most staggering thing. I mean, we have no democracy when the leading opposition party is being undermined and effectively sabotaged by its own people over a period of years that covered 2 general elections, working for Labour to lose. Just extraordinary. And and there's this thing that there are people who are interested in politics and including people who are Labour Party members who know a lot of this, know the things that Starmer has done that have been very, very not only destructive to the Labour Party, but changing what the Labour Party stands for, and going against everything the Labour Party has always stood for, but also not just in terms of policies, but in terms of democratic processes, selection processes for candidates, things like that. But also, I would argue, make them entirely unelectable. And as you rightly pointed out, Starmer's lost his first 3 by-elections and probably about to lose Batley and Spen, which would be staggering. Corbyn, of course, won his first 4 by-elections. But at the moment, all the polls, despite the most horrific government that we have, and the extraordinary rates of death under the pandemic and the corruption, we have the Tories leading in most polls by more than 10 points. And that's partly, I think, there's how people that are involved with the Labour Party, left-wing people and people interested in politics, know a lot of the stuff that Adam outlined there and are disgusted by it. And so many people are leaving Labour in their droves, members and supporters, because of Starmer's leadership, and desperately hoping he will go and be replaced by someone far better. But there are also those, as you noted, there are those that pay not a lot of attention to politics, who will have no incentive, who won't know any of that stuff that Adam outlined, but will have no incentive to vote Labour under Starmer because he hasn't stood for anything so far. He hasn't unveiled any policies, any new direction for the country, any change. It's just sort of more of the same. So I think whether you're interested in politics and a left-wing Labour supporter, or whether you don't really pay much attention to politics, there's no real incentive to vote Labour whatsoever at the moment. And of course he would say, well, he's biding his time, and he'll unveil manifestos and policies when it approaches elections and so forth. But by then it'll be too late. People have already got an opinion of him, and it's not good. And of course, the other thing is he's been given an easy ride by the media. They haven't been attacking him. 1% of the extent that they attacked Corbyn. And when it comes to the election and all the billionaires decide they want to keep the Tories in power, they will attack Starmer accordingly, and Mandelson, and so Starmer everyone will be reminded that he was the architect of Labour's Remain policy. So anyone that voted for Brexit, still believes in Brexit, will not want to vote Labour. Everyone will be reminded through the media that he was the Director of Public Prosecutions when the decision was made not to prosecute Jimmy Savile, though albeit factually he had nothing to do with that decision. It was not under his remit, and he wasn't part of that decision making. But that won't stop the media and people on social media saying that he let Jimmy Savile off. Mandelson, of course, was close to Jeffrey Epstein, so they'll be described as friends of paedophiles and arch Remainers. And are they likely to get elected once the media start tearing into them like that? Of course not. I really hope Labour find a new direction and a new leader soon, because God knows we need it.
Yeah, and to finish off, it's astounding that somebody who's a member of the Tripartite Commission, which is a globalist, pro-European entity that wants neoliberal economics, again, globally, and was an arch Remainer, was chosen by the Labour Party in order to win back the Red Wall. It says so much of the people who are making those decisions and who are voting and orchestrating manipulating the voting within that party, that they should
And
choose
also,
somebody that is a born loser in this instance.
Yeah, and also it must be said, he lied. You know, everything he said when he stood to be leader of the Labour Party, he made a load of pledges, you know, around uniting the party and carrying forward the most of the elements from the manifesto, which was universally popular. So universally, it was popular with the vast majority of the public. You know, at the last election, 2019 election, when the manifesto policies were put before ordinary random people of all political persuasions, but they were not told which party those policies belonged to.
Exactly.
The Labour manifesto was by far the most popular. So those policies that the Corbyn led Labour Party put together over a number of years and sort of culminating in the 2019 manifesto, extremely popular with the public when they don't know you know, who's put them forward. And he promised to retain most of that, and he's gone back on all of this. He's gone back on, you know, holding you know, constituency Labour parties electing their candidates. He's parachuted in his own centrist candidates who haven't been popular, who've all lost. In the local elections, pretty much all of the centrist Starmer parachuted in candidates lost, and pretty much all the left-wing socialist candidates won in local elections. And of course, in Wales, where led by Drakeford, where the Labour Party is much more to the left, they did extremely well. And Starmer's response to all of that was to say, we need to go more to the right. It's just staggering. And if you didn't, you know, if we didn't know better, you know, there are a lot of people who believe that he's been sent in to destroy the Labour Party from within. I don't necessarily believe that, but it would be hard to do a better job.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and no doubt we'll be coming back to this again and again. But moving on to the next topic, an interview I did at the end of last week, actually after last week's show, with Minna Leatham, who is campaigning on behalf of the Dorset and Hampshire and the Dorset and Wiltshire and the Hampshire and Isle of Wight air ambulance, following the horrific crash that she experienced, which tragically left her partner dead. But she's now spending so much of her time campaigning in order to raise money, because as she rightly points out in this clip, she had no idea that the air ambulance is not funded by central government, and it relies heavily upon charitable donations. So here's my interview that I did at the end of last week with Minna Leatham. Hi, Minna Leatham. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Hello. I'm all right, thank you. How are you doing?
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you. We've invited Minna onto the page today to talk onto the program today to talk about Dorset Somerset Air Ambulance and the money raising efforts that you're doing to help sustain it, because obviously it's played an extremely important role in your life. Can you give us a little bit of a backdrop, Minna, in terms of sort of what happened to you and why the air ambulance is so important to you?
Yeah, so on the 16th of November, my boyfriend and I and a few friends were driving through Salisbury to my mum's house, and we were involved in a head-on collision with a Range Rover, and it was quite a very bad accident. And so the air ambulances came to, so Hampshire and Isle of Wight air ambulance came to my aid, and they flew me to Southampton Hospital, and they were massive in saving my life, and they stopped me from being paralysed, which is I'm so unbelievably grateful for. They also gave Dorset and Somerset ambulance helped. They cared for Hugo, my boyfriend, who travelled him Southampton too, and they made sure that he was still alive when he reached hospital, even though his injuries were catastrophic. But they ensured he was alive when he got there, so that his family could be with him before he passed away, which we were all so grateful for. And I was so shocked as well to find out that they're not funded by the government. So I want to say thank you as best I can by raising some money for them.
Fantastic, fantastic. We've experienced not anything near as tragic as yours, but we were in a head-on collision just outside Bristol in 2015 when the air ambulance was called and the road was closed.
Yeah.
Compared to you, Minna, we got away unscathed, but it's absolutely horrendous. But like you say,
Yeah.
I mean, they're there so quickly, they work act so promptly.
I know they can literally get to like anywhere, and they came to us in 15 minutes, which is insane.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's amazing. So what is it that you're doing, Minna, now in order to help raise money? Because you've raised, according to your Just Giving page, you've raised about £22,000 so far. So what is it you're doing, and what ultimately is the amount that you're looking to raise? Have you set a target?
Well, my target, I did it on my, so this idea came to me on my birthday when I was with some friends earlier this year, and my target was initially just £1,500, and so I've beaten my target, so I'm yet to set a new target. I just didn't realise it kind of blew up. It was insane.
Amazing.
So I'm really happy with it. But my challenge is to walk 5 miles, which I know doesn't seem like a lot for the average person, but my back is still in recovery after being broken, and so I can't really walk very long at all before I need to sit down and take a breather. So I'm walking to my boyfriend's family pub in Bristol, which is nice because it's where he grew up, and it seems like a nice place where we can all celebrate after with his family and turn it into quite a positive occasion. And yeah, so it's just a 5-mile walk.
And how long do you think that will take you?
I don't know. I think I'll have to take a break every half an hour or so, or 45 minutes for at least 15 minutes to just sit down. But I'm doing it with a few friends, so I'm going to be hopefully very patient. And
what date in July is this?
it's on the 2nd of July.
2nd of July. 2nd of July. And is there a number of you doing it?
Yeah, there are 4 of us, and we've all been kitted out with Dorset and Somerset t-shirts and Hampshire white t-shirts.
Oh,
It's good. We'll be represented.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So we'll obviously put up the Just Giving link as well when we put this program live. But can you just tell the viewers what the link is for them to be able to click on it and give money?
Yeah, so the link is straight to my Just Giving page, and you can donate however much you want, anonymously or non-anonymously, and you just pay through PayPal, I think, or whatever's easiest for you. You can do card, and literally any donation would be so appreciated, because I know it's like everyone's worst nightmare when they get their driving license that will end in disaster like it did for us. But it will just give you so much more confidence knowing that if it does end in the worst case scenario, there are teams like the air ambulances that will come and get you and help you as best they can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And hopefully, a lot of people will give, as much money as they can for what is an extremely worthy cause. Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Minna, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah, it's wonderful to speak to Minna. Harrowing, bearing in mind the experience she's been through, and of course she's still so young, and she's come out the other side, but she's obviously been left with a lot of detrimental aspects to her daily existence, and she can only walk for about 10 to 15 minutes without needing a rest, and she's still got significant damage to her major organs. But like she says, it was the air ambulance that got her to a hospital. It was the air ambulance that got her partner, even though he died, to a hospital so that the family could say goodbye. And she just feels that she owes so much. But of course, there is a major issue, isn't there, Tom, in that she shouldn't be having to do this.
No, I mean, and what a brave young woman, and fabulous that she's doing so much to try and save the air ambulance service, and I take my hat off to her. But yeah, I mean, there's an issue here, isn't there? That we're now living in a time when public services and things like the air ambulance, the RNLI, lifeboats, etc., things that improve the quality of our lives and enhance our safety and chances of survival in the event of accidents, etc. If we want those things, we've got to fundraise for them as charities. You know, the government has no interest in actually investing in those things to give us better life chances, improve the quality of life of our lives, improve society, and make it safer for all. They've got no interest in that anymore, unless, of course, those things can be delivered by their wealthy mates running private businesses, where they'll skim 40% off the top and go and buy a super yacht with it. You know, unless they can do that, they've got no interest in funding it. And there's the German comedian Henning Weig, who said something along the lines of, yeah, we don't have charity in Germany, we have taxation. Yeah, well, our taxes are being given to the rich. And if we want things like the air ambulance, we've got to fundraise for it. Well, you know, what an appalling state of affairs. We're not being governed, we're being scammed.
Yes, and talking of scamming, let's move on to the next topic, and GB News and the corresponding attacks from the right-wing media, the Express, the Telegraph, and the Mail at Stop Funding Hate, because there's been a campaign, an ongoing campaign, since GB News announced that they were going to be the new media corporation on the block, just to prevent the well-known advertisers from giving them any money, because it would taint their brand, being aligned with an opinion-based pseudo-Fox News, in which we know from the very outset that they were intending to go for this, whatever it's supposed to be, this anti-woke agenda, which feeds into some research and some comments that were made yesterday, which in themselves, I suppose, you know, you could argue, you know, it's in a democracy. It's fair enough for people to have an opinion. But yesterday we had Sir John Custis, who is an election expert, is professor, who exposed how the Conservatives were running an anti-woke agenda to appeal to the prejudice of many Brexit voters in order to keep their support. So he's effectively come out and stated that the Conservative Party was hemorrhaging support, just like the Republican Party in the United States. They had to find a big niche. They had to find something to wrestle the momentum away from the Democrats in the States and from the Labour Party in the UK. And Brexit, creating division, and primarily using narrative that preys on people's bigotry and prejudices, was how they attained that. And for well over a decade, they've been massaging and manipulating language in order, again, through their billionaire corporate media. And GB News, as I said, is the new kid on the block who will sustain that and make that almost their raison d'etre, to appeal to those people who believe that they should be allowed to be racist, homophobic, sexist, transphobic. They should be allowed to have an opinion on everything, and that opinion should count as much as anybody else's. But I wonder, you know, within our society, Tom, if you went to the doctor and the doctor sat there and made no examination of you and said, you know, I think you've got, you know, cancer of the testicles, and you said, "Oh, brilliant, doctor, thank you very much. How do you know that?" I really haven't had time to do an analysis, and it's my Boris Johnson impression, but it's not a very good one. But in my opinion, you know, that testicle does look slightly different, and therefore, you know, I think we should put you straight onto chemotherapy and start dealing with it. Now, if you're a type of person who just completely falls for that relationship between, that superiority relationship between a doctor and patient, and you acquiesce to that opinion, then the chances are that you're going to be treated for something that you haven't got. It's going to do a lot more damage to your body. And yet it seems that the prevailing ideology in this country now is to stop listening to people who've spent their life and dedicated their lives to systematic methods of uncovering reality. Even though on occasions it may be flawed, but to go into a new ideology that effectively says, forget all that, I can look at you and I can make a judgment, and therefore you should now move forward on the judgment I've made of you, no matter where it leads.
Yeah.
Now, I suspect, Tom, that the outcomes will be far, 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 far more negative than listening to, certainly not an objectively 100% accurate professional, but I suspect that they are much more likely to get it right than the population is, who doesn't rely upon those scientific and systematic methods.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. And just in case anyone was wondering, that article on Dorset Eye, long-time Remainer stands at dispatch box and lies about Brexit. In case you weren't clear, that's Boris Johnson. In case you thought it might be someone else. Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, Jace. That what the Conservatives and the right stand for, both in America and in Britain, is something that over time no one's going to vote for. They stand for, wealth going increasingly to the very, very wealthy, the top 5% or even the top 1%. We've seen that vast shift of wealth from the poorest in society and from public funds to the extremely well off who are busy shopping for super yachts on a daily basis now. We've seen an erosion of workers' rights. We've seen erosion of environmental standards, erosion of food standards. We've seen erosion of attacks on people's rights, human rights, and we've seen a lack of housing and poor housing, lack of social affordable housing. We've seen stagnant wages, wage freezes, austerity. All increases in attacks on our NHS, cuts to our NHS, cuts to doctors, cuts to nurses, cuts to hospital beds, and cuts to services like mental health services. This is all we've seen, and after a few years of that, no one's going to vote for that anymore. 5% of the population who benefit, the very rich might still vote for it, but the rest of the population aren't going to vote for it. So what do the right do to carry on implementing those evil, vicious, divisive, murderous policies? What do? They invent these culture wars that encourages people who are being harmed by their policies to vote for them to continue implementing them. And these culture wars take various forms, but mostly, as we've seen recently, it's always been for 20, 30 years, there's been an attack on political correctness, which is a pushback from the right and from the corporate media on political correctness. And most recently, coming across the Atlantic from America is this war on woke and wokeism, which is the big thing at the moment, and what GB News have spent a large proportion of the first couple of weeks they've been operating, focusing on this war on woke. And incidentally, this attack on political correctness. Political correctness is, in my mind, is a force for good. It's part of the gains that have been made in society in a progressive way, progressive gains over the last 50 or so years since the civil rights movements. And we've seen both society change for the better in terms of understanding and appreciating the rights of all different people. But also we've seen laws change to put into law that people, disabled people, gay people, women, black people, have rights, have equal rights. And that's in law. And those gains were hard fought, hard won over 50 years. And the last 10 years under this Tory government in particular, there's been a massive pushback against those progressive gains because some of those gains harm profits. Ultimately, this is mostly, I would argue, about workers' rights and creating conditions, which the right always wants to do, create conditions for profitability, create the optimum conditions for capitalist accumulation. So the accumulation of profits by the very rich and wealthy. And that means compromising workers' rights for the vast majority of us. And ultimately, it's mostly about that. So this pushback against political correctness gone too far. Health and safety's gone mad. Oh, you know, so-and-so disadvantaged people now have it better than the rest of us. All this kind of nonsense, you know, that's been preached by the right for so long, and now forms this huge anti-woke agenda that's being pushed by GB News. Ultimately, it's about creating an environment that's as profitable as possible for the very rich and is harmful to the rest of us. But of course, it stokes these culture wars, these phony culture wars, which gets people, poor and you know, average earning people, working class and middle class people, to vote against their own interests because they agree with you know, some of these phony culture war ideas, or they agree with waving the flag and being nationalistic, or they agree that, you know, Black Lives Matter are actually a bunch of Marxists or whatever. They're persuaded to agree with these things, and it's apart from anything else, it's desperately sad because we're now seeing huge amounts of, you know, working class people, white working class people, reading the gutter press, believing in these phony culture wars, taking part in, you know, in divisive politics, and continuing to vote for policies that harm them, and that's really sad.
Yes, thank you, Tom. It reminds me of that analogy of the farmer who watches somebody walk over his land every day, and every day they walk over the land, one of the horses in the fields comes over and kicks that person, and the person falls to the ground in agony, and then gets up and crawls or staggers out of the field, and then repeats it day after day after day. But instead of the farmer pulling the person to one side and saying, look, this is how to avoid being kicked, they set up a distraction. So they either take their clothes off and go, woo, like that, or they get somebody else to do something weird, so that instead of the person learning how to avoid being kicked, all they do are distracted, so that they just keep coming back and coming back because they've never learned those skills. And that's effectively, you know, the type of society that we've created, which GB News, instead of coming onto the scene and saying, look, hey, let's make this country wonderful, let's unite everybody together, let's find out what sort of values that they think are really, really important, and let's unite together to make it a long-term systemic structure that benefits everyone. No, they've come on to attack a certain demographic who want that. So we say, this isn't working, we want that. Woke. We say, the number of people in being taken into custody who are black, who have died, and there's been no police investigation. Woke. We say, the role of the female within society needs to change dramatically. And we have seen it evolve for the different waves of feminism. Woke. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you want something progressive and better for society and for yourself, you become not a woke necessarily because you're an activist, you become a woke for pointing it out. Yeah. So what it is, it frightens people into silence. Yeah. But also, as you rightly say, it means that those people whose diet is the billionaire corporate media, in which they're fed being whacked by a horse every single day, but are never taught how to avoid being kicked, just keep coming back for more. It's almost as if they get used to the pain, and in some part of them psychologically enjoys the pain Because what the corporate media do so well is to say, it's not you that's the problem, it's the others. And the others aren't those people who are on those super yachts or living in their mansions, you know, on the hills above Nice. It's your neighbour. It's the people who are gathering in the car park down the road, who've been doing that for centuries, a lot longer than you've been stuck in your little box staring at a screen in the corner. They've been doing what they're doing for a lot longer than you, but hey, they're the problem. Or it's the immigrant, the Asian, the Muslim, the Jew, it just goes on and on and on. So, you know, it's like watching EastEnders 24/7 and watching nothing else. You can see other people's misery, and somehow it makes your misery that little bit better. But if we go to GB News, because we're running out of time now, if we go to GB
Can I just
News,
say a quick thing before you do, Jace, which is yeah, I mean, you remind me of that often spread around sort of meme, which is exactly right, which is that what's happened in Britain is the people earning £1,000 an hour have persuaded the people earning £14 an hour that their problems are caused by the people earning £9 an hour. It's often spread around, and that's exactly what's happened. It's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing that, you know, divide and rule, blame, scapegoat, and and this, you know, war on wokeism. I'm, as I've mentioned before, I spent too much time on political debate groups, which can be inspiring in that I've come across some extraordinary thinkers and wonderful people, but also some less so, and some people with truly hideous views, sadly. I sometimes get called, I get labelled woke, or I get, you know, especially, you know, in the last 6 months or so, particularly because it's, you know, the current thing, the current trend from America, from Fox News, that's come across the Atlantic, is to label people woke, or an SJW. I get called an SJW, a social justice warrior, and that always strikes me as weird. You know, all the right can do to have a go at you is to say, you believe in social justice. How awful of you. You know, what?
You sound like Stuart Lee there.
You said, it was a bit, wasn't it? You person who believes in social justice, you know, what? So they don't, and they're proud of that. That's just bizarre to me.
Yeah. And taking it back to, you know, the focus on GB News, it is interesting how those early stages of GB News have been so chaotic. And it's just the same as Boris Johnson, who is chaotic. It's just the same as the referendum and the 5 years since the referendum result went in favour of those people who wanted to leave the EU. Absolutely chaotic. It's like this idea that actually you can govern people and you can win over support through chaos. And of course, we have to remember that the nature of neoliberalism and the so-called free market, which we've never experienced, but the so-called free market effectively leads to chaos. Because the more competing things that you have hitting against each other in order to win over that space, the more chaos and conflict you get. Mm-hmm. So if we look at this clip, and it'll be all right on the night. If anybody remembers that program going back to the 70s and 1980s, when you went through all these TV programs from around the world and things went badly. Well, this is just a short clip from the beginning of GB News of things that have gone badly. And yet, I suspect that in this time of chaos, this will be attractive to so many. It won't be perfection. It won't be people who have had all the rough edges rubbed off over years and years and years of experience in the media industry. This is people who are sat down behind a desk and this happens.
2, 1,
See you
bye.
Cheers. Charming. Yes, that graphic wasn't necessarily describing us, but it was pretty
Thanks,
close.
everyone.
Anyways, they leave
Well done.
the video. A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to GB News and this premiere of McCoy and Phillips.
Yeah, it's a busy day, and all eyes will be on the Prime Minister later when he's expected to announce a delay in the easing of restrictions in England. It won't come as a surprise, but do get in touch to let us know what day a delay would affect you.
Yeah, he'll say he's acting on advice of a scientist. Has Boris Johnson been consistent? You've done your part in the last year. Has he?
And it's the 4th anniversary of the horrific Grenfell fire.
Some way to go. We'll be joined now by MP Peter Dowd, and down the line, sorry, we have not got Peter, we've got Mark Littlewood, though, from the IEA, who joins us, I think, down, well, we're talking to Mark in just a moment, because those figures do show some improvement in those.
Must be part of the central curriculum.
Well, thank you there, Professor, for your views. We have to leave it there now, Professor Callum Semple.
Callum Semple.
Oh, sorry, Nigel.
Okay.
Jeff Palmer, sorry, I'm all over the place. Thank you, Professor Jeff. I'm a bit confused there when he...
Yeah.
How do you run a roller coaster in a pandemic? I don't quite get that.
Very similar to how you run it when it's not in a pandemic, to be fair. You know.
Unity and the pure joy that came when Prince Harry married Meghan. Britain absolutely got...
And Trevor, this is the reality of this situation, isn't it? It's going to be a death sentence for many businesses.
I do not find it acceptable at all that members of all this House are elected to come here to serve their constituents, not to...
As Boris Johnson puts it, for many years, out there, Trevor Kavanagh.
You know, once we've vaccinated all the vulnerable, then it's once we've vaccinated all adults, then it's when everyone's had 2 jabs, now it's once all adults and children are vaccinated. Next thing is going to be all adults, children, the rest of the world, their dog, and the aliens in space.
Well, let's hope not. Talking weddings, I'm here at a wedding venue, not to get married myself. If I am, that's news to me.
Really cool. And actually, imagine if you're going for a really long drive in the hot desert, the car breaks down, it's okay, you can drink the exhaust, the water.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah. I think I can't drink tea all day.
Moving on, still my story. Thermal recycling. Now that's Brum and Amelia from the east of England. Amelia, let's go to you first, because you're in Bedford where there are flood warnings. There was serious flooding there over the years, particularly in the early 2000s. How likely do you think it is that there will be more flooding where you are?
Well, then, slight correction, there aren't any flood warnings here at the moment. It is actually pretty bone dry, but you are absolutely correct in that this area of Bedfordshire was absolutely decimated by flooding at Christmas last year. That was at Storm Bella.
MPs have been.
Tom, I don't think your microphone is working as well as it should, but you're saying really interesting things, so maybe we can sort that out and you'll come back and let's talk further on that. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I mean, while Tom's here, I just wanted to ask you a couple more things, if I may.
The microphone's not working.
Okay. Well, all right then.
No, it's not.
Let's move on to Amelia Harper in Bedford. Amelia, you're standing there.
I'm just going to say something, because if you've seen the papers, if you've seen Twitter, some people think it's really funny to send in texts and messages that, on the basis that if we read them out, you know, we've been had. You're still doing it, and I'm watching them, and it doesn't help anybody, you know.
We're just not going to read surnames from now on.
Well, to the person who's just messaged, grow up, you know. We're a new company, we're a new broadcaster, there are systems that we're putting in place that would stop idiots like you getting through. They're getting through at the moment, but please, you know, we've got other things to worry about.
Come on now.
Mind you, if you can hear us, that's an improvement. So, thanks for all your views. All of you with serious views, we still welcome GB Views
we do.
at GB News.
Now, my namesake Alex Wickham, what a great journalist he is at Politico, has revealed the government has apparently been advised. We had a little bit of an early jingle there. I think everyone thought I'd finished.
Hilarious.
Yeah. I know.
But like you say, perhaps the complete lack of professionalism, the look of it, the poor production values, umpteen times they've got people's names wrong in the captions, and so many mistakes and errors. It's just laughable. But maybe that's appealing to their demographic, and maybe it's the equivalent of, as we know, Boris Johnson deliberately ruffles his hair to look like a ragtag scarecrow who doesn't know what he's doing. But maybe that appeals to that demographic. They find it endearing or lovable, or just different from the elite. So there's this sort of anti-elite thing that the right do when they are the elite. They represent the elite, the wealthy, the privileged, but they attack the elite, especially in terms of media, and pretend they're not a part of it. So maybe it's appealing that poor production values and things. But I want to make just one last point on GB News, which is that we heard a while ago, 6 months or so ago, that GB News was launching and also a Murdoch TV channel. I found that unbelievably disturbing and worrying. I know quite a lot about Fox News and the effect that Fox News has had in America, and clearly, obviously, Fox News are owned by Murdoch News Corporation. It can destroy a society, destroy democracy. It's that powerful, really, that Fox News, and so the idea of two new, very right-wing channels, one owned by Murdoch, launching in this country, I felt was a bit of a death knell for this country. It made me start to think about moving abroad for the first time in my life. And thankfully, Murdoch has pulled the launch of his channel, and it probably isn't going to happen. And that's a good thing. But GB News, perhaps there's no need for a Murdoch channel, because GB News have launched straight into the Fox News style content. And what I mean by that, Jace, is that they, purport to be a news channel, but they're absolutely not. They're an opinions entertainment channel. And just in case viewers aren't aware of this, in the last couple of years, Fox News have been sued in America for misrepresenting the truth, for lying, for not reporting news accurately. And they've been sued. And on 2 occasions, Fox lawyers have successfully argued in those court cases that they're not a news channel, that they're an entertainment and opinions channel. And they've argued that successfully, despite their name being Fox News. I don't quite know how they've been successful with those arguments, but they've successfully argued that their viewers don't expect and aren't entitled to factual news, because everyone accepts that it's an entertainment and opinions channel. And Sean Hannity, one of the, I'd say disgusting Fox News presenters, literally, said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I think our viewers are able to, discern the difference between opinion and news. Basically saying, yeah, we're an opinions channel. If people think it's news, then that's tough. We're not. And so yeah, their lawyers have successfully argued that. And GB News is doing exactly the same. It's an opinions channel that purports to be a news channel, but it's not. It's spreading right-wing propaganda and doing all of this. Really can be traced back to Murdoch's The Sun Says, which launched in the 70s. Before that, most news media, radio, TV, and printed newspapers, generally reported the news, maybe with different political slants, but certainly just reported the news. They didn't purport to push an opinion. And that changed with The Sun Says, with an editorial column which said, this is our view, and we're going to share it with you. This is our opinion on that. And that over the last 40 years has been replicated and multiplied across, just about all newspapers and media channels, so that we get a lot of opinion rather than fact now.
Yeah, of course, although it must be remembered that the Daily Mail very openly came out in the 1930s in support of Adolf Hitler. Yeah. So I think it's been going since the dawn, if you know what I mean. And I think it does worry me as well with the now prospective privatization of Channel 4, whether Rupert Murdoch might be in the running for that. And if he is, it's just going to be another death knell in terms of news broadcasting, providing alternative ideas. And they have an hour-long program, longer than any other mainstream news broadcaster in this sense. You know, if you think about BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and Channel 4, the traditional news broadcasters before the satellites came along. And for them to lose that, or for them to have it molded and manipulated along the lines of a GB News, or along the lines of an editorial process in which, as Professor Stephen Luke talks about, it's not what they tell you, it's what they don't tell you. All the things that are left out are the most important things usually, because they're only feeding you stuff that they want you to know or think about. And that again, is just an epitome of where we are in 2021, with all that hope that people left the 20th century going into the 21st century, all that hope that they had for things getting better and changing. And what we've seen because of the politics and the politicians are things getting worse. It's a frightening, horrible prospect. Well, the last topic, and you're going to introduce this, is an interview that you did yesterday with Ben Ashelford.
Yeah.
So tell us about Ben.
I've known Ben for a little while, and but he's Ben's the commentator at Weymouth Football Club. But as you'll see, viewers, from the interview, his career has sort of gone into the stratosphere in that he's commentating on matches across Europe, international games, and so forth. He's a fantastic commentator, lovely chap, huge supporter of Weymouth Football Club. And here's the interview with Ben.
Fantastic.
Ben Ashelford, hi, and welcome to 10 by 6.
Hi, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great, well, lovely to see you. So you got the England shirt on?
Absolutely. Hopefully for a nice big win tonight, it'll be nice.
For those that are perhaps puzzled by that, because we might be out the tournament by the time you see it, who knows? We're recording this on Tuesday the 22nd in the evening, about an hour before kickoff of the England-Czech Republic game. So thanks for giving us the time here, Ben. So Ben is an up-and-coming young superstar of the football commentary business. Ben's been involved as a expert commentator for Weymouth Football Club for many years now, and now is sort of Weymouth and beyond, in that your commentating career has gone into Europe and covering international matches and things like that. So I just thought it would be nice to ask you to start with, give us a little summary of how your commentating career has developed over time.
Well, it all started really with just putting myself out there. I've always wanted to be. I grew up with radio commentary, listening to games with my dad, and I always wanted to give it a try. And eventually, after a couple of beers one night, I decided to put myself out there, and I sent an email to Weymouth, the club that I happen to support, and they very kindly invited me along, and they gave me an opportunity to commentate at Maidstone for the first game of the National League South season. And I turned up with equipment that I'd never used before, no experience whatsoever. I had BBC Radio Kent to my left, and I had award-winning Radio Stones down in front of me, and I had no internet connectivity or all sorts, and it was an absolute a bit of an embarrassment. And we had a lot of teething issues to start with, but we solved those, and people seemed to enjoy it. And after a couple of years, a company from the Czech Republic came in and sent me an email and offered me a position just covering some games. And it took off from there, really. And I've been fortunate enough now to do a Spanish Cup final and a German Cup final in the UEFA Under-21 European Championship final most recently. And I've also been told that we're doing Premier League and Champions League next season. So it's going really well.
Wow, that's amazing. You really are, like, from Weymouth and beyond. Local boy done good. No, it's I mean, it's amazing to hear you covering Copa del Rey finals and things like that. It's amazing, Ben.
It was a very, very good experience. Learning the pronunciations wasn't quite so fun at times, but no, it was very good. Thank you.
I can imagine. And you've done some stuff that's obviously, where people are watching on television or live stream or something, but also stuff that's akin to radio. So I just wonder, what's the difference in terms of your approach to commentating when people are watching the action and when it's sort of on the radio? It must be a very different medium.
Yeah, it's something we started obviously with a radio style commentary. It went out online, but it was audio only. That's the style I actually prefer. That's my favorite style. I had to learn very quickly that the difference is when you move to television, it's narration rather than description. So with the radio, you have to describe everything as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing worse for me than tuning into a radio game and having the commentators have a conversation and you've got no idea what's happening on the pitch. And with television, it's a little bit different because they can see what's happening. And all you have to do is just be the voice over the top. And it's something that I wasn't very good at to start with, to be honest with you, Tom. But it's something that I developed and learned, and it's getting there slowly, but I still prefer the radio style.
Yeah, I can imagine with television, you kind of more or less have to pare it back. You have to hold back from your natural way of describing everything because people can see it, and just add things that are of value.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting things I've heard was from Clive Tildesley recently. And he said that after Man United scored the equaliser in the 99 Champions League final, he knew to keep quiet. So the atmosphere came across on the television, everybody calmed down and things like that. And that struck a real chord with me, because if you talk too much, you're in danger of spoiling the moment. Yeah. Always remember that commentary is not about the commentator. That's the biggest advice I can ever give to somebody. It's not about the commentator. It's about the action, and that's what people are tuning in for.
Terrific. And how about pre-game research? I imagine, especially with international and European matches, it's particularly difficult when you're not seeing those players week to week. Well, describe a bit for us what your pre-game research would normally be.
The first thing I focus on is myself. So if I've just done a game, for example, either that evening or the next day, depending on whether it's a long journey time, I will listen to it back and make notes, because with every commentary, there's something I like, there's something I don't like, and it's how you develop and learn. When it comes to research, it's basically a case of forcing yourself to sit down and go through every name, everything you can think of to go through, and you go through goals, assists. Sometimes I watch highlights if necessary, to hear how other commentators pronounce names and things. UEFA for UEFA competitions, they do send out a nice pronunciation guide, which is really handy. But ultimately, it's about having something to fill the time if you're watching a dire 0-0 game, which I've seen a few now. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just filling that time, and it's just really sitting down and forcing yourself. That's the main thing. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. Do you have a sort of crib sheet of facts and statistics and things that are worth pointing out in front of you?
Absolutely, you have to. It's easy to refer. I've covered Portugal, the Portuguese national team, 3 times since the turn of the year. So I've got a folder, and I can just open up, and I've got stats and all sorts that are written there, and then I can add to them as I go. So it's I'm becoming a bit like Monica Geller from Friends with her binder collection, and I'm getting there. I'm gonna have a shelf full. If I got more binders than books, though, I'm in trouble, because I do love to read, as you know.
Cross between John Motson and Monica Geller.
That's right. Yes.
Well, fabulous. It's a strange image in my head now.
You should be in my head.
And what would you say have been some of your sort of commentating highlights in terms of matches, goals, people you've met? What's been some of the highlights for you?
I think, do you know what the highlight's been the past year for me? Not necessarily because it's not been easy for anybody, but ultimately, as you know, I'm a big Weymouth fan. I always have been before the commentary. But for the past year, I've been privileged enough to actually be in the ground and be able to attend games, while all of the hard-working supporters who've had to raise lots of money to get Weymouth to where they are now, and they've had to stay at home and watch the stream, and it's been really hard. So to be honest, the highlight for me has been an honour and a privilege to actually be able to be in the ground and provide a service for those wonderful supporters.
Oh, well, that's a lovely thought, and good of you to say that. I know that I know lots of Weymouth supporters that love listening to your commentary, and obviously have really appreciated tuning in over the last year when they haven't been able to go to games.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate every single Weymouth fan. I think that they're absolutely tremendous, and not just because I am one, but the feedback and the support I've had since I started working for the club has been unbelievable. So I'll always be a Weymouth boy.
And what about, you mentioned a good tip earlier in terms of, you know, learning that it's not about you as a commentator. Sometimes, you know, BBC Radio 5 Live or other media have sort of annual competitions for young aspiring commentators. It's great hearing, you know, teenagers and 10-year-olds having a go at commentating, and it's great fun to listen to, and hopefully some of those will go on to have a career in sport and commentating. What would you say would be your tips for young aspiring commentators?
Listen and practice. The biggest thing for me, if you want to go into radio, for example, instead of watching a game on Sky Sports or whichever channel it may be on, put 5 Live or Talk Sport on, listen to the game, make notes, go to a local game, a local school game or a local team's game, record yourself on your phone. Sit somewhere away from everybody else if you're self-conscious to start with. Get the voice recorder on your phone, record the first half, give it 24 hours, then listen back to it, and then go back the following week and go again and keep going and keep going. Eventually, once you've got maybe 10 or 12 recorded, then go back and listen to your first one and then listen to the 12th one, and I guarantee there'll be an improvement. But the biggest advice I can have is, firstly, put yourself out there, because if you really, really want something, don't let anybody stop you getting it. Go and get it. Practice, 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 and listen, listen, listen. That's the best advice I can give to anybody.
Not just, I mean, some of that is good advice for life, not just for commentating on sport. But
well, I don't know anything about life, I'm afraid, but commentary I can do.
Great stuff. It would be remiss of me to let you go without asking you for a Euro prediction, maybe also a prediction on how you think Weymouth will do next season. So any thoughts on that?
I've put me on the spot there. Weymouth, I think, are going to improve. I think they finished 18th last year, a weird season, admittedly. I think they're going to go mid-table. I think they're going to be fine. And for the Euros, I'm going to tentatively say England to win.
Okay.
I can't say anything else, can I? I want to
not
say
wearing that shirt. No.
My head wants to say Italy will win it, but my heart says that England, it's our year.
Who knows? It could be. I mean, Italy have looked extremely strong, and there's obviously, you know, good strong teams like France and Belgium. Even Germany have come good now all of a sudden. So lots of good strong teams in there. But I can't get you to say anything else other than England are going to nick it.
Yeah, England to win it, and if not England, then I want Denmark to win it for Christian Eriksen. But apart from that,
wouldn't that be amazing? And how? I mean, just extraordinary to see how Denmark have performed in the 2 games since that awful night when Christian was obviously so ill with the heart attack. So just incredible to see Denmark play so well in the next 2 games and qualify from the groups. What a wonderful story, and well done to them, obviously.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And it just shows that as much as we love football, and football is pretty much my life, it's still always second to life and friends and family. So everybody stay safe and come on, England.
Absolutely.
Brackets or Denmark.
Absolutely. Well, that was great, Ben. Fascinating chatting with you, and well done on, you know, I've seen your career develop over the last few years, and, you know, keep going. Well done on being a local boy done good. And
thank you very much.
You know, look forward to you commentating on a World Cup final, including England, in the future.
Not as much as I am. But no, thank you very much. It's been an honour.
All right.
Come on.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that was great, and a huge thanks to Ben for giving up his time just before an important England match to come and talk to us. But fascinating to hear about all his research and the work he does to be such a great commentator. Good luck with your burgeoning career, Ben.
Absolutely, and he mentioned Clive Tilsley, who is my favourite commentator at this point. You know, I mean, Barry Davis. It was always that Barry Davis versus John Motton. I always preferred Barry Davis, and certainly with Clive Tilsley. Long time, going back well into the 90s. I loved his commentary, and it's a shame he was demoted by ITV, but there you go. Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week, Jace. It's been really interesting, and we've had, you know, again, some great interviews with fascinating people who, as I've said before, actually know what they're talking about. But the bits where we've chatted, I've really enjoyed too. And thanks everyone very much for watching. Don't forget, do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you could. That helps us, and do leave comments. Let us know what you think about these issues that we discuss each week. All right, so see you next week, Jace.
See you next week, Tom. You take care. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.